Hi everyone, in this video I'm going to share my top tips for drawing fur in pastels, and these can be applied to any fur colour or fur texture. Now my first tip is to use the right paper. This is a big deal when working with pastels, and my paper of choice is Pastelmat by Clairefontaine. Now this really is a unique surface, and as yet there's not a paper that I've found that's as good for letting you use the number of layers that are required for this level of realism. So tip 2 is to get a good base foundation. Now for me, the base layer is a crucial part of the drawing process and really does influence how realistic the end portrait is going to look. Now the base layer, it's going to affect the softness of the fur, the colour saturation, and more importantly, the overall contrast. Now this is something that I'm going to talk about later on in this video. But here you can see I'm working with my pastel pencils to really create a softness at this base layer stage. Now what I'm working with here is to make sure that I'm just hinting at the main lights and darks, but really crucially I want something that is blended. I don't want there to be any harsh start and stop points, which is why you can see I'm softening these layers as I go. Tip 3 is the detailed layers and how we should apply them. Now this is going to vary depending on the fur texture and the fur colour. I've got lots of different videos here on YouTube that show how to adjust the layering process depending on the sort of fur that we are drawing. Now of course this is something that I do focus thoroughly in all of my real-time step-by-step lessons. Everything is recorded with a voiceover while I'm drawing, so I'm able to explain everything in the moment. If they are of interest, I'll link my real-time tutorials in the description below. So with this first stage, what I'm looking at is avoiding mapping in my brightest details first. So here with this, I would say this is more of a lighter mid-tone, but this fur on this section of the body is overall very light. But what I want to be making sure of is that I've got the mid-tones established and I'm not jumping into those brightest details that are actually sitting on the very top layer of the fur. You want to leave those lighter highlights for more of your last layers. Tip 4 is pencil technique. Now this is where we want to be focusing on fur direction, fur length and fur thickness. Now all of this is also in combination with the layering process. Now what I mean by that is there are some layers of fur that may be curving in different directions compared to the top layers of detail. So this is where we need to be working on one layer at a time. And again, this is something that is far easier for me to explain in my step-by-step lessons. But this area here is a great example of that. You can see that I'm using a lighter shade here to map in some of the fur that is overlapping and curving a little bit differently to the base layers that are closer to the skin. So having this variation of my pencil technique and noticing the changes in fur direction and the length of the fur and the thickness of the fur is going to add lots more realism to the portrait. Now a common mistake when drawing fur is that it's very easy to get carried away with these kinds of details, and before we know it we've actually covered up too much of the layers underneath. Now this is going to be affected more so if you're working on a smaller portrait. So this was actually only about an 8x12 size, so it's not that big. So I need to be realistic with how many of those details I can add in before I then cover up too much of my base foundation. Now going back to what I mentioned at the beginning of this video and how the base foundation is crucial, we don't want to be covering it up all completely. So therefore adding more of those details, we are losing out on the softness that has been achieved at that base layer stage. So tip 5 is good contrast, and this is crucial. This is one of my main considerations from start to finish, all the way from a base layer to those final details. Now contrast is something that we are always adjusting with each layer that we add, but going back to tip 2, the contrast actually starts at the base layer stage. Now the contrast is going to vary depending on the fur colour and the lighting of the reference photo. Here for example, because this fur is much lighter, I don't actually want to go too dark with my base layer stage, but it's important to make sure it's dark enough. Now this is something where I really do cover this in my real-time tutorials because again, as I've said, the base layer is a crucial stage. But if it isn't dark enough and it's too light, then all the details that are added on top are also going to be too light. Now, if you're using a pencil that you feel should show up and it isn't, that's an indication that your base layer isn't dark enough. That on its own is going to be a really good sign that the overall contrast of the end result is not going to be right if the details aren't visible to what they should be. So if that is occurring in your drawing process, then you do want to make sure that your base layer is dark enough. Now, one thing I do want to mention regarding this is, let's say you've got a particularly bright highlight or such as this where the fur is overall quite light, you might want to work with a little bit more of a lighter base layer, but then come in and add your darker colours on top, rather than starting with a layer that is darker where it should actually be, and we will get to that point, but maybe start off with something that's a little bit lighter and then add a darker colour on top. And I've done that throughout this section of the lesson. I want to be making sure there that if I do make the fur darker, that I've made that decision cautiously so that I don't make this fur too dark overall when the last layers are added. So this is again something that I can cover more easily in my real-time step-by-step lessons, because I'm able to really explain that process and why I'm making that layering change at the time. Now, my last tip, tip 6, is the correct highlight and shadow placement. Now, I've slotted this in at the end of this video because I feel like it's one of the things that is often overlooked. Now, the placement of the highlights and shadows is crucial. It determines the underlying bone and muscular structure, as well as the importance of fur direction. Now, if, for example, a main highlight or a main shadow is put in the wrong place, it can actually make there appear to be a lump under the skin, the skull shape might completely change, it might actually look like the leg is not correctly placed or positioned on the animal. There are many different things that can have a negative impact on that portrait if the highlights and shadow placement are wrong. So when I work with my base layer stage, this is why I always focus on this and I map that in right from that initial layer. I want to be making sure that as much as I can, I'm capturing the correct shape and form of the pet or the animal that's on my easel. So I do hope this video has been helpful. If it was, I'd be very grateful if you could give it a like and a thumbs up. It makes a huge difference to my channel. I also upload a couple of videos to YouTube every week, so if you would like to get notified of that content, then don't forget to hit the subscribe and the bell button. If you are interested in drawing along to this or any of my other step-by-step lessons, then I'll link all of the information to those in the description below. If you do have any art-related questions, feel free to pop them in the comments. I'm more than happy to help if I can. And I'm going to be uploading another video next week, but as always, thank you so much for watching.